I got really interested in the occult because of these crazy experiences I was having. I started kind of seeking out just whatever spiritual knowledge I could get my hands on. Astral travel, opening up your third eye. I thought that if I could master these practices, that I would be able to protect myself. I was like, wow, I'll be able to fight these things. It didn't work. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. All it seemed to do was just open up more doors, and it just kept exposing me to more and more of this dark presence. These encounters I had with this demon, I would wake up and this thing would be like face to face with me. It was so jarring. I remember just kind of backing out of the bathroom with toothpaste falling from my mouth. There was one time in particular that was really, it was just so crazy. I did my little third eye thing and I put myself in a meditative state. And
Hi, welcome to Touching the Afterlife. Today, we are going to be hearing from Bryan, who since birth was afflicted by demons. He would open up his third eye, tapping into familiar spirits, reading people's minds. And as a teen, he had a near death experience from alcohol poisoning. Wait till you hear his story today. Welcome, Bryan. Hi, Bryan. Thank you for being with us today. And I would love for you to share your story and start with where you want to start.
okay, well, my story starts all the way back at the beginning. I think I was around 8 or 9 months old when I was learning how to crawl, and my parents would find me just completely hysterical. My eyes would be bugging out, and I'd be staring at something like it was attacking me and just screaming my head off. And it would take, 20 minutes or so to get me to calm down and snap out of it. And they were pretty worried there was something wrong with me. It just kept escalating and escalating. And uh, the worst time was when my grandma was babysitting, and she came in the room, and I was just really going crazy, and it took her forever to get me to just snap out of this like frozen stare and just this horrible screaming. And when I did, I guess I don't know how to describe it. The way she described it was that I just kind of, my eyes flashed over to her, and it wasn't even me. I started making these like animal noises and just like snarling and growling at her. And, just picture a little baby doing this. And I like kind of came after her on all fours, like a wild animal. And it freaked her out so much that she didn't know if she ever wanted to babysit me again. Uh, Fortunately, it just seemed to be like a phase. It didn't really seem to happen after that. And they just kind of wrote it off as just this weird phase I went through, and never even mentioned it until I was, in my 20s. They kind of mentioned it a little bit. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that I kind of, got all the details. But while that phase seemed to pass, what stuck around for me was this incredible fear of the dark. Like, never could handle being exposed to the dark, especially in a enclosed space. Like, there had to be a light, there had to be sound, I had to have a TV on, door cracked open, something. So, as far back as I can remember, like even back when I was 2 or 3, I don't remember too much, except for every night when it was time to go to sleep. It was like this war of attrition, just trying to talk myself into being able to fall asleep. I would have, put the covers over my head. Uh, it was every night. And I never saw anything. I didn't know what I was afraid of. I just knew that I was very, very afraid of whatever this thing was. And uh, it just kind of went on like that up until I was maybe in fourth or fifth grade. I'm sure a lot of guys can relate to this. I one day stumbled across my dad's his porn stash, and that just seemed to open up some doors or something. At the time, I didn't put two and two together, but it went from being afraid of the dark and not knowing what I was afraid of to now I was starting to see something. I would have these horrible dreams and I would wake up from them, and before I even saw it, I could feel it. It was this like inky black kind of, sometimes it would be a mist and other times it would be like a full apparition, just kind of like leering over the bed. And, you know, saying it was scary doesn't even do it justice. Like this was, it, I don't know, it seemed like scarier than dying. I don't know how to put it. Like every time I had one of these experiences where I'd see this thing, it was, it's like, that feeling like if you're, you turn off the lights down in the basement, you kind of run up the stairs, you kind of feel a little freaked out. It, it it's like that times 1,000. It's like if you got submerged into a tank of liquid fear. It it was just the worst feeling I've ever felt, and it always seemed to accompany really really dark dreams. Um, I like to have, or I used to have these dreams where I would die as other people. It was very disturbing. I would like be an older guy having a heart attack or drowning in a car that went off a bridge, and I would wake up from those dreams just locked in that state of fear, and that's when I would see this thing. Uh, my parents never experienced anything, but my brother, as we got older, he started having some similar experiences. It was never as intense as mine. It seemed to be kind of focused on me, but we would both hear these footsteps going up and down our stairs. We had a weird kind of arrangement where there was a stairway that went through the bedroom upstairs, and you had to walk through that bedroom to get to the other bedroom. And we were always switching bedrooms because neither one of us liked staying in one bedroom for too long, and switching rooms kind of somehow brought us, I don't know, it just seemed like it made it better, but it would only last a few weeks and then we would switch again. But it was very unnerving just hearing those footsteps going up and down the stairs, and then just seeing that black presence that would wake you up. And it wasn't every night, but it just seemed to keep escalating. And I believe now that it was um, going from being an innocent kid to finding my dad's porn stash, and that really seemed to just like open up a portal or a doorway to experiencing whatever demonic stuff this was. And as I got a little older, not much older, I grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, which is like a party town. And so by sixth grade, uh, I started smoking weed. And then by eighth grade, we're taking acid and shrooms and stuff. And that really, really escalated the activity. And because of that, I got really interested in the occult. Um, we weren't a religious family at all, but because of these crazy experiences I was having, I started kind of seeking out um, just whatever spiritual knowledge I could get my hands on. And we didn't have the internet back then, so I'd be going to the library and finding books about like different indigenous people's practices. I got really interested in kind of like the new age stuff, astral travel, opening up your third eye and all that stuff. And it seemed to actually work. I thought that if I could master these practices, that I would be able to protect myself from whatever I was experiencing. And it didn't work. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. But I was also having these incredible results from like uh, what do they call it? Like aligning your chakras. And I was able to open up my third eye, I guess. I don't know how to describe it, but I would put myself in this deep meditative state where it just kind of felt like this intense vibration right here in the middle of my forehead. And it would just kind of wrap around to the back of my head and just cover my whole body in this crazy energy. And it really felt like flying. Like it felt like I was moving at hundreds of miles an hour. And so I really thought I was onto something. I was like, wow, I'll be able to fight these things, is what I thought. But all it seemed to do was just open up more doors, and it just kept exposing me to more and more of this dark presence. Um, these encounters I had with this demon or whatever it was just seemed to keep getting just more and more intense, to the point where I would wake up and this thing would be like face to face with me. And it started not just being at night, but also experiencing stuff during the daytime. Um, there was one time where I was brushing my teeth, and I went to go reach for the faucet. And this was like 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. And I just, as I was reaching for the faucet, both the hot and the cold spun on, like with such supernatural speed. It like you couldn't do this with your hands. It'd be like if you tied a rope around the faucet and then yanked it as hard as you could. And it was so jarring. I remember just kind of backing out of the bathroom with toothpaste falling from my mouth. And there was another time where we had a Super Nintendo, and occasionally during the day, my brother and I would be sitting on the couch, and it would just get clicked on. And if you remember those things, like, they don't just click on, you have to actually apply a few pounds of pressure to get it to come on. Uh, Books would get knocked off shelves, just all sorts of weird stuff like that was starting to happen. And you'd think that all these would be enough of a warning to stop messing around with this stuff, but I just kept plowing ahead, just thinking that if I could just master this or that type of meditative practice, that I would be able to fight these things. Um, there was one time in particular that was really, it was just so crazy. My friend and I, after school, went over to another friend's house, and we were waiting for him to come outside. And we were sitting on his doorstep, just waiting around. And to pass the time, I suggested to my buddy that we guess each other's numbers. Um, and he was like, sure, that sounds all right. So I did my little third eye thing, and I put myself in a meditative state. And the first guess I got right. And he was like, wow, that's crazy. And I was like, well, let me see if I can help you do it. And so I did my third eye thing, and I just kind of focused on transferring that over to him. And it worked. He was able to guess what I was thinking, and we just kept kind of going back and forth. We went from numbers to symbols and words and stuff, and we were getting almost every single one right. And each time we did it, we would go into a deeper and deeper and deeper state of meditation, to the point where both of us felt like we were flying. Like I said earlier, it felt like not quite like free fall, but it's just the craziest feeling. Like your whole body feels like it's electrified and just moving so fast. And on the last guess, I looked over at my buddy and I said, okay, I'm ready. And his eyes rolled back into his head, and he just falls face first into the gravel, and he starts having a seizure. He's just convulsing and flopping all over the ground. And when that happened, I could hear this chorus of whispers kind of started to emerge all around us. And it was saying witch. It was like, witch, 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 witch. And it was just coming from everywhere. And I shook my buddy awake, and he had no idea what was going on, and he didn't even remember any of it. Like, he remembered what we were doing beforehand, but he had no recollection of of the seizure or the event. And that should have been the end of it, hearing witch being whispered like that. But it didn't stop me. I just kept on going with it. Um, and I had another experience with him. It was just a few weeks later. He was staying over at my house, and like always, I listened to really loud music to go to sleep, you know, and I was sleeping in the room that had the stairway, and we had an open window, and it was a full moon, and so the moon was shining into the room, so it was lighting everything up, and we were kind of just talking back and forth, getting settled in, ready to go to sleep, and all of a sudden the music cuts out, and it wasn't just quiet. It was like this eerie supernatural quiet that just took over the room, and neither of us knew what was going on, but immediately we were just struck with this insane fear. It was just terror. It was one of the worst experiences I'd ever had as far as feeling that demonic fear. And because as soon as the music cut out, I looked down at him. He was sleeping like kind of like on a little pallet we made on the ground, on the floor, and I could see in his eyes he was completely terrified. And right as soon as that happened, this figure, it looked like a white dress, this female figure kind of floated past the second story window, and as she went out of view, that same whisper came, where like this chorus of whispers just started going like, and just kept getting louder and louder until there was like this explosion sound where like the whole house shook, like a bomb went off. And both of us start screaming, and I had to like jump over him to go and turn the lights on. And I went downstairs. My parents didn't hear anything, and we spent the rest of the night, uh, both in my bed, with the blankets up over our head, and we were hearing whispers and just experiencing weird stuff for the rest of the night. And I believe that was the last time he stayed the night over at my place. Um, and it was around the same time frame, where I actually had an NDE. Um, Back then, no one really talked about near-death experiences. Um, and what had happened was I went to my first party that was, that had alcohol at it. We had this buddy that he was that one guy in high school that somehow had his own house, so there was no parents there. It's kind of just like a Lord of the Flies type of place. People dealing drugs, using stuff all the time. And I went to their very first annual Everclear party, and I had no idea what I was doing. I had never really drank before, and the night started off pretty normal, but as it progressed, I didn't know how dangerous it was to drink too much, and I was just guzzling like hard alcohol, Everclear, vodka. I was just downing it, and there came a point where I just remember just getting kind of sleepy, and I just blacked out. And all I remember from it was just this one kind of frozen moment of seeing this. It was a face, but it wasn't human. And it was like a supernova of light coming from its face. It was just all white with every color kind of mixed in, like this crazy, like bluish, iridescent kind of tone to this white light. And at the time, I just assumed I was hallucinating. I didn't know what to think about it. But when I woke up, everyone was looking at me like I was a ghost. They were just, I was like, what happened? What happened? And they were like, dude, you were throwing up blood for about 6 hours. Like, we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with your body, because they called poison control after, I started heaving up all this blood, and they told them to take me to the emergency room, but uh, when they got there, that they would all be arrested, which was not smart to tell these people. But so they were too afraid to take me to the hospital, and so they just kind of waited it out and just wanted, they didn't want to get arrested. So these were not the very best of friends. Um, and that's all I remembered from that near-death experience, was just this feeling of love and peace, and I just assumed it was the guy that was kind of taking care of me. I didn't even know who he was at the time, uh, but yeah, this face was just, it's the most intense feeling of love I've ever had. It was just like right up in my face, this just crazy ethereal blue white light. And anyways, I woke up from that, and that was one of the crazy things about it, was because I threw up blood for hours, and I just popped up and walked home like I felt fine.
Bryan, looking back, who do you think that man was?
I'll get into it later, because I did have an experience with who I believe is Jesus, but I think it was some sort of angel, is what I think now, because it was basically like just this really loving presence that just kind of got in my face and was just like, nope, not yet, and just kind of poked me back into my body.
Right, keeping you alive. Okay.
Hmm. And so after I had that near death experience, um, it that's what really kicked off a lot of this paranormal activity. That's when I really started seeking how to meditate. I thought that if I could learn how to open up my third eye and astral travel, that was going to be how I fixed everything that I was dealing with. And so I got really into reading about what the Egyptians did to astral travel, and I was getting pretty good at it. I don't even want to say how I did it, because I don't want people to do this, but I would get to this point in the meditation where you feel your soul, like it's like a tugging feeling. There's like kind of being pulled out of your body, and I was never able to get past that. And after a year of trying, um, I finally did. And you know, even though I used drugs, all throughout my teens, on this day it was just a regular day after school, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to give it a shot. It was something I tried every single day, so I didn't really have too much expectation from this. But so I was completely sober, just a regular day. It was during the day, and I I did the third eye thing. I kind of put myself in the same state I always did, but this time felt different. It felt deeper and more intense, and it happened a lot more quickly than it usually did. And on this occasion, that I was able to get pulled out of my body, and it did not go the way I was hoping it would go. Um, Immediately, I was seeing scenes from all around the planet of just horrific violence, and just people doing the worst possible things to each other. And the images just kept getting more and more graphic and faster and faster and faster. And I had this vision of leaving the planet, and now I know, I think they call it the outer darkness, where it's basically up in Earth's orbit, and I was just looking at the planet, and then everything kind of fades to black, and I'm just left in this black limbo. And I felt a little peace for a second, and then this most beautiful face I've ever seen in my life appeared, and I was like, oh, good, finally something good's going to happen. And this face just starts coming up closer and closer and closer. But I quickly got this sense of dread. And as this feeling of dread and fear started to build, um, it went from just having it just had like a completely blank face. But as it got closer and the fear and the dread built, it started to have like this Joker like smile, very demonic, very creepy smile. It's the scariest smile I've ever seen. And it was feeding off of my fear. And it got to the point where it was kind of nose to nose with me. And it just had this overwhelming sense of like, I've got you. And I just had to shake myself from that meditative state, and I just jumped up and I ran out of my room. And it was around then that I kind of swore off ever trying to use my third eye or to meditate. I never wanted to do it again. That was kind of the end of that whole experiment, because I finally had accomplished what I had set out to do, and it was the most terrifying experience I'd ever had. It was scarier than any of the ghost experiences I had had. Uh, it was very intense.
I'm almost grateful, Brian, that that happened to you because you saw it for what it was.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So what happened from there?
Well, after that, I entered my I got into my 20s and just kind of lived as like a back then I was selling drugs, and just partying all the time. Um, I thought Christianity was so stupid. I really did. I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. Um, I thought it was like a crutch people use to get through life, and just if that's how they needed to lie to themselves to get through the day, then whatever. But I really thought it was very stupid. And, and all those horrible, dark uh, experiences I had had always let me know that, well, there's a God, there's something, there is a spirit world, there's more than just the material. So I wasn't one of those. I wasn't an atheist. I was just agnostic, where I knew there had to be some sort of higher power, but I just assumed that people were too dumb to know what it was. But so I continued to, like, I would smoke DMT, I would take shrooms every once in a while, and I had very profound experiences, and most of them were extremely positive. Um, but it kept those doors open. I just felt like even my wife, who at the time she was my girlfriend, but this is like 20 years ago almost, and she always said that she just felt like I had this dark thing following me around, because I would just have the worst luck. Like, no matter how hard I tried to do something, it just seemed like something would always come along and mess it up. You know, and it was just like this. And I always thought so too. It just felt like my whole life I just had this dark thing that was just attached to me, and would just follow me wherever I went. But there were a few times when we would take shrooms together or something like that, and I would kind of do the third eye thing, where I would focus on it, and every single time we would have shared experiences. I would be able to, tell her what she was thinking about. She would see the same things I was seeing. Like, it was very interesting. I'll say that. But um, it definitely it was definitely the enemy. I'll just leave it at that. That's how life went. I would just dabble here and there in the it was kind of like a psychonaut. I would seek out these profound experiences using hallucinogens, and Uh, and I got to a point where I didn't really use them anymore, but I got really focused on a business I was building, and I was sure it was what I was supposed to be doing. And I spent 4 years building it up, and I won't go into the details, but through no fault of my own, all the money we had raised to start this business was stolen through a bankruptcy from a third party. And it was a really difficult year. This was a little over a year ago from now. And it was very hard to get over that. But then, right at the same time, I lost my mother to pancreatic cancer. And it was so fast. It was from the time we found out till the time she died. I think it was like 2 or 3 months. And this was easily the roughest period of my entire life. Like, it was very, very difficult to get through. But one thing that happened just weeks before, because between losing my business and my mom dying, or finding out that she was going to die, I think it was only about 2 or 3 weeks. So it was basically like this very short period of time where like my whole life got unraveled. Um, it was it was just a couple weeks before all the fallout, where I was walking my dogs across the street, and it was just a normal day, and I was, everything seemed fine. I was just kind of just bored and just thinking to myself, and out of nowhere, I had this thought, and it almost seemed to come not even from myself. The thought was, I wonder if God could ever be proud of me. And it was such a weird, because I'd never cared who was proud of me, let alone God. And like, I was kind of puzzled by the question I had asked myself. And before I could even respond or think too much about it, it felt like from behind, I was just, uh, I just got this bear hug of love, is how I describe it. Where it's like if you were 2 or 3 years old and your dad picked you up and gave you a big hug. It literally felt like that. It was so jarring, so just out of left field. Um, I was just in shock, and I just started bawling my eyes out like a crazy person. So literally, just kind of whistling, humming to myself, walking the dogs, just do 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 do. Hey, I wonder if God would ever be proud of me. And then boom, I'm crying. It was insane. I'd never felt anything like that. Even my near-death experience, I said that was the deepest feeling of love I'd ever experienced. I don't know. I think that this one has a slight edge on that. It was the most profound feeling of love I've ever felt. You know, it was way more intense than even holding my daughter for the first time after she was delivered. Like, there's nothing even comes close to how this felt. And I came home and I told my wife, and I really didn't know what to do with it. I really didn't know what to do with it. But what it did was I started thinking about, and this experience came with a knowing too. Like, I knew it was God, but my whole life, I always thought there was a God, but I never thought it was Jesus or the Christian God. But when I had this experience, it came with a knowing that, like, this is the Christian God. I don't, there's no explaining it. And if it hadn't happened to me, I would never believe anyone who said it. And that's kind of what's so frustrating about having some of these experiences, is because, yeah, I wouldn't believe it, but it happened to me, and it just comes with this like supernatural knowing, you know.
Wow.
And it was, I thought about it every day after that. I was just like, because nothing bad had happened yet. I hadn't lost my business yet, hadn't found out my mom was dying yet. And
Wow.
just before that, it was about a week or two after I had that experience walking the dogs, where uh, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that meditative practice that I used to do. And I don't think anything bad will happen if I use it to focus on Jesus. And now, after learning, just real quick, after learning everything I've learned about the third eye and all this occult stuff, I wouldn't recommend praying like this, but I didn't know any better at the time. And so I thought, what the heck, I'll go ahead and try this. So it was like no time had passed at all. I kind of just sat there on the couch and did my thing. And immediately I was put in this very deep meditative state. And almost immediately, I started to feel this sense of there a demon coming in the room. It was kind of like black and white static on a TV was everywhere. It was all around me. That's all I could see. My eyes are closed, but this is all I could see with my eyes closed, like seeing in the spirit, I guess. And this demonic figure walks in the room, and I'm like, okay, here we go. I knew I shouldn't have done this, but as soon as that happened, I felt um, I just knew it was Jesus. I don't know how else to explain it, but I felt him come from behind me and just kind of blast this demon thing away. It was just gone. And that same feeling of being embraced with this crazy feeling of love swept over me. And it was at that moment that I started hearing this singing in my ear. Like you could almost feel the breath in my ear. And it was, it was crazy. It was completely crazy. And it was in that moment that I was infused with this knowing that the Bible's real, Jesus is real, God's real, it's all real. In fact, that's what I screamed when I shook myself out of the meditation and I just yelled, honey, come in here. It's all real. And I just kept saying, it's all real. It's all real. And I still didn't really know what to do with it, but it was just like God gave me this knowing that it's all real. And I hate to admit it, but I never would have believed, I never could have believed if I hadn't had such an overt, um, just this heavy handed way of showing me. Um, so, yeah, that's how I
Yeah.
came.
That's an incredible, amazing, touching story. I love that, he meets each of us where we need to be met at, and he knew that you needed that because you didn't know any better at the time. But then, as we know better, we do better. And then he probably, I'm assuming, and you can go into that, he walked you through the different ways that you were deceived.
Yeah. It, in that moment, the second time, my second experience, I just, because I was smoking weed at the time still. That's about all I did. But I just knew everything I was doing was bad. Even judging people, even my thoughts, just thinking about something bad about someone, I realized that was bad. Like I didn't even have to. I'm just now trying to kind of get through the Bible, and it's crazy how it's like just kind of coming to life now. Because when I've read it several times when I was younger, just out of curiosity, and it always every time I read it, I was like, yeah, it's a bunch of nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. But when I read it now, it's just like it just hits different. It's just and it's just reaffirming all these things that were just put into me that like I just know. Like I know all these things now. I know what the sin is, and I know what uh, basically I found out that I was living in total sin, and so much of what I was doing was so wrong, and I had no idea. But he really helped me out because like a lot of guys, I would say probably 95% of dudes watch porn. I've just even guys that are Christian. I've talked to some of my buddies who are Christian and they fight. They struggle with it. I'd done it my whole life ever since I was in fourth grade. But after that moment, uh, boom, dropped it, done. Like I know a lot of people struggle with it, but I had no struggle with it. And ever since, I've just completely abstained from that. Stopped smoking weed, which I had trouble with giving up. Um, Stopped drinking. I just kind of gave everything up.
That's
Still
amazing.
struggling with not being judgmental. I try. I really do.
Well, again, it's a
Help me get there.
process. Yeah. I love how the Lord supernaturally will deliver us from some things. And then once we mature and go through the sanctification process, there's things he wants us to actually walk through. I'm curious to know, what was your wife's reaction? It sounds like you've been with her for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty shocking. Um, she didn't know because I was like a kind of like a Bill Maher type where I just made fun of it constantly. I've made fun of Christianity my whole life. Um, I remember like her mom is Christian, and she was talking about how she found some tarot cards in one of her sister's rooms, and she was like, "Well, that's evil and this and that." And I was like, "Oh, that's so silly." We both had a good laugh about it. So she didn't know what to make of this. And I hate to say that if the tables were turned and it was her that had these experiences and it came to me being like, it's all real, I would have thought she'd lost her mind. I don't have no idea how that would have affected the relationship, but probably not for good. Uh, but luckily, she's amazing, and she's always believed me as far as like having all these dark encounters I had when I was younger, and she's always believed everything I told her about that. And I think she believed it because there's a few times when we were tripping where I was able to show her things by putting like I would have visions and I was able to share those with her without us even saying anything about it beforehand. So she knows this stuff is real. She knows the spirit is real. The spirit world is real. She's experienced it with me. So at first, though, she still really didn't know what to make of it. It's a pretty intense thing to go from being someone. We have joke about Christianity together. So to go from that to doing a complete 180 out of nowhere uh, was pretty jarring for her. But she trusts me and loves me, and it took a little while, but um, now I, I think she'll get there herself eventually. But what was so great about all this, what was so amazing about my experience with finding God was that it came for me uh, right in the nick of time because like I said, it was just a week or two before my entire life just crumbled. I'm sure people have experienced worse. People lose kids, people have horrible experiences, but I worked every day, 80 hours a week at least for almost 4 years straight building my business. And when when this bank went bankrupt and stole all of our investors' money and just destroyed everything I was doing, that was a tough pill to swallow. It destroyed everything I had worked for, and I through no fault of my own. And then, my closest family member, we have a very small family, and so losing my mom during the fallout from my business, like she was like who I would go and talk to. Like that was like 90% of my support structure outside of my wife.
Okay.
So those two losses were so intense, and I was able to, if I hadn't have, had my come to Jesus moment, if I was still, if I wasn't a believer at that point, I have no idea how I would have responded to those losses, but it wouldn't have been good. But it was because I had had those experiences just before the bottom fell out of my life that
Exactly.
I was really able to deal with it a lot more in a healthy way that I've never been able to do in the past when faced with true adversity.
Do you see the hand of love, the
Oh yeah,
arms of love of God, how his grace and love have comes to us beforehand? That's happened so much to me in my own life where he gives you something, a gift that he's with you, he loves you before tragedy strikes. And I just love it. We just recently had a guest on. His name is Paul. And the same thing. I love how God works where he was an atheist. he mocked Christians. He had a supernatural visitation from Jesus too, just like you. And it just blessed me so much. And you're saying the same thing where he cried because the Lord came to him and gave him a hug.
What's funny is I had a I have a buddy who I've known him for a long time, but it's one of those friends where you'll go weeks, months without talking to them, and then you'll just kind of call them up out of the blue, or they'll call you, and it's like no time had passed at all. And I didn't know what to do with these experiences, but I knew that I had to tell the people, anyone I knew I had to tell them, like, hey, I'm Christian now. It's, it's going to be a shock. Um, so I called him, and I told him everything that had happened, and I was just kind of bracing for him to be like, what's wrong with you? Or you're crazy, or okay, weirdo, because that's probably how I would have responded to him. I'm ashamed to admit it, but it's true. But I called him and I told him everything, and he was just real quiet. And he says, "Well, that's really interesting, because that just happened to me. Like within the same, like within a few days of each other. Like we've kind of did the math on it, and he had almost exactly the same experience with the singing in the ear. I mean, it was insane.
Wow.
Um, so it almost seems like there's something in the air, you know. You,
Yeah, we're in the last days and God is really moving on hearts of people in supernatural ways. I absolutely love it. And I want to kind of circle back with some open doors. You talked about the third eye. You were really tapping into familiar spirits. Tell us a little bit now. I know that you have your, family members. Talk about those open doors and other people that are experiencing that.
yeah, well, I've spent this last year just really listening to other people's testimonies, and it really does seem that sin literally opens up doorways for you to be attacked. And that can be what you're doing, it can be what your parents are doing, it can be what your grandparents were doing. And I'd say my dad's side of the family, not like the other side's perfect, but I just feel like there was a lot of sin there, um, especially with drug use and drinking. And it just seemed like I was marked as a baby, because I have felt this darkness following me, and it's still there. I'm working through it now. Um, I, I'm trying to work on being delivered of it, but especially as a kid, like there were doorways opened, and it's real. That stuff is real. And when I started getting into the occult, when I just thought as meditating, like, how could that be bad? How could it be bad to get in touch with your higher self? Why would that be bad? Or I used to think that everyone should like, before you can even vote, I thought that you should have to have a psychedelic experience, because research shows that if you use mushrooms and have an experience, that you're 60% less likely to commit a violent crime and all this. And some of that is true. But what I came to find was that when you use these occult practices, if you take psychedelics, you do get to the spirit world, and you can get to these other realms, but you're using a fake passport to get in. You know, you're not doing it the right way, and you're basically left defenseless.
That's really good. There's a partiality, and Jesus doesn't want to be Jesus is the only way.
That's when I had that last experience. Like, it was, again, it was just like I was just infused with that knowing, and it all made sense, because it should have been pretty obvious, looking back, that the stuff I was doing was making these experiences worse and worse and worse, and it just kept getting darker and darker and darker. And when I had that experience where I left my body, when I had that astral traveling experience, like, that's what it seemed like. It basically, like, I was out in the outer darkness, I guess. Like, I don't know exactly if that's what it was, but it felt like this. I don't even think that was a demon. Now I think that was like a fallen angel or something, because it was I it was the most beautiful man, male figure I've ever seen ever. It was just so beautiful, but it was so evil. Like, and basically, he caught me out, after curfew or just where I wasn't supposed to be, and was like, "Well, look, who do we have here?" Was kind of like the vibe from it, and it just sank his talons into me, and I feel like it really opened up a lot more doorways for me to just be um, attacked for the rest of my life. I'm still dealing with it.
I'm curious, Brian, through all of this and how the Lord came to you, was anybody that you know a Christian praying for you?
Yeah, my aunt Debbie, she's prayed for me for decades now, and I've got another buddy who I know was praying for me as well. And I used to think he was so silly. I was just like, I thought it was ridiculous that he was always trying to convince me to read the Bible or to go to church. And but I know he was praying for me the whole time. But I remember when I called my aunt to tell her about it, like, she was just so happy. I've never heard her so happy. She was just crying for like good 5 minutes straight because she's been praying this whole time for that. And then finally, I had that crazy, crazy coming to Jesus moment.
Praise God. The intercession is just incense. If we could see our prayers going up to the throne and God answered her prayers. I love that. As we close today, what would you like to leave us with for some final thoughts? And I would love if you can say a prayer for anything that's on your heart.
Well, it's just so frustrating because literally nothing short of what happened to me would have ever convinced me. There's no combination of words. There's just nothing that could have ever been said to me at all. It took God literally tapping me on the shoulder and giving me a hug for for him to get through to me.
It reminds me of Paul in the Bible. It took a radical encounter for him on the road to Damascus. And these supernatural encounters, I just love it. But I want to just thank you again for coming on and vulnerably sharing what your experience was. I would love to pray with you, Brian. So let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for bringing Brian with us today and sharing his incredible story. And I love, God, we love how you touch our hearts and how you draw us in together into your spirit because you love us that much and you are the way, the truth, and the life. And I thank you for Brian. I thank you for every listener. I pray that you tug at each heart that may be away from you right now and that they would experience you just as you are to them. In Jesus' name we pray.